Admiral Elena Vasquez walked through the long corridors of Nexus Prime Station. Her black uniform looked simple next to the fancy clothes worn by other species. The station buzzed with activity as representatives from across the galaxy gathered for an emergency meeting. Elena had been Earth's voice in the Galactic Council for 3 years now. She knew the other ambassadors thought humans were new and primitive. They smiled politely at her, but she could see the doubt in their eyes. Today would be different, though. Today, she would offer Earth's help to fight the growing threat that scared everyone. The meeting room was huge and round. Representatives sat in groups based on their species. The Etherians floated gracefully in their section, their pale blue skin glowing softly under the lights. They looked like angels with their long flowing robes and gentle movements. The Kithara clicked their mandibles as they talked among themselves. Their insect-like bodies were covered in hard shells that shone like metal. The Vorthok stood silent as always. Their crystal bodies caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. Elena took her seat in the human section. She was alone, except for her aide, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mills. All around them, the other species had large groups of advisors and experts. It made the human delegation look small and weak. Council Leader Vitarith called the meeting to order. The old Etherian's voice carried easily through the chamber. "We face a threat unlike any we have seen before," he began. "The hegemony has destroyed 3 more worlds this month. Their technology surpasses anything in our combined fleets." Holographic displays showed the latest attack. Massive black ships tore through defensive lines like they were made of paper. Energy beams melted entire cities in seconds. The destruction was total and terrible. Ambassador Zeth Kora of the Etherians spoke first. Her voice was musical but worried. "Our finest ships barely scratch their hulls. Their shields adapt to every weapon we use. We need new strategies, new technologies." The Kithara military commander, General Hixthak, buzzed his agreement. "My swarm fighters are useless against them. They destroy hundreds of our ships without taking damage." Elena stood up slowly. The room grew quiet. "Earth offers its full fleet to help fight this enemy," she said in a clear voice. "Our ships and crews are ready to join the battle." A moment of silence passed. Then Zeth Kora began to laugh. It was not a mean laugh, but it was not kind either. "Oh, Admiral Vasquez, we appreciate your spirit. We truly do. But your ships?" She shook her head with a smile. "What about our ships?" Elena asked. Her voice stayed calm, but her hands tightened into fists. "I visited your world last year," Zeth Kora continued. "Your museums are quite charming. All those old warships floating in harbors. Those metal boxes with their chemical rockets and primitive guns. Very historical." General Hixthak clicked his mandibles in what Elena knew was laughter. "Those ancient vessels lack even basic energy shields. Their weapons fire solid metal projectiles. How quaint." The Vorthak representative, Kreeses Tal, spoke in their ringing crystal voice. "The hegemony uses quantum disruption fields and adaptive plasma weaponry. Your kinetic weapons would be absorbed harmlessly by their defensive systems." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Those ships have more combat experience than any vessel in this room. Combat experience from conflicts between primitive humans centuries ago," Zeth Kora replied gently. "Admiral, your species has been in space for barely 50 years. The hegemony has fought wars for millennia. Our recommendation," Council Leader Vitarith said in his diplomatic voice, "is that Earth focuses on evacuation procedures for your colonies. Leave the fighting to those with appropriate technology." Elena looked around the room. Every face showed the same expression. Pity mixed with embarrassment for the primitive humans who did not understand how outclassed they were. Even her aide Sarah looked uncertain. "I see," Elena said quietly. "And when the hegemony finishes with the outer worlds and moves toward the core systems, what then?" "We have plans," General Hixthak buzzed confidently. "New weapon designs, better shields, faster ships. The combined might of 3 advanced civilizations will stop them." Elena nodded slowly. "Of course. Well, Earth will consider your recommendation." She picked up her datapad and stood to leave. "Admiral," Zethkora called out. "Please do not take offense. Your people are brave, but bravery alone cannot win against superior technology." Elena stopped at the doorway. "You are right about one thing, Ambassador. Bravery alone is not enough." She paused and looked back at the assembled representatives. "But you would be surprised what humans can do with bravery and the right tools." The trip back to Earth took 3 days. Elena spent most of it in her quarters, thinking. Sarah brought her reports and meal trays. But they spoke little. The lieutenant commander had been quiet since the meeting. "They might be right, Admiral," Sarah finally said on the second day. "Our ships are old compared to theirs. Maybe we should focus on protecting our own people." Elena looked up from the star charts she had been studying. "Tell me, Sarah, what do you know about those museum ships they laughed at?" "Basic stuff from academy history classes. World War II vessels mostly. Some from other conflicts. They are impressive for their time. But what? But they are from before we had real space technology. Chemical fuel, metal armor, gunpowder weapons, nothing that could hurt a modern starship." Elena smiled for the first time since leaving Nexus Prime. "That is where you are wrong, Commander. Those ships were not built to fight other starships. They were built to fight and win against impossible odds, using whatever tools they had." She turned back to her charts. "Contact Fleet Admiral Chen as soon as we reach Earth. Tell her to gather the heads of every naval museum and historical society we have. We have work to do." "What kind of work, Admiral?" "The kind that will remind the galaxy why humans keep their old warships." Elena's smile grew wider. "Those aliens think our museum pieces are relics of a barbaric past. They are about to learn that some relics still have teeth." The ship continued its journey home through the dark space between stars. Behind them, the Galactic Council continued their meetings and made their plans. None of them suspected that Earth's most powerful weapons were not in active service but sitting quietly in harbors and museums, waiting for someone to remember what they were truly capable of doing. Elena knew something the Council had forgotten in their centuries of peace. Warriors do not just fade away when their wars end. They wait, and sometimes, when the need is great enough, they return. 3 months passed after the Council meeting. Elena had returned to Earth and immediately began working with Fleet Admiral Chen. Their plans moved forward in secret, while the galaxy continued to debate strategy. The attack came without warning on a Tuesday morning, Earth time. Elena was in her office reviewing restoration reports when her communication system screamed with emergency alerts. 12 different worlds across the galaxy sent out distress signals at the same moment. "Admiral," Sarah burst through the door. "The hegemony is attacking everywhere at once. The Outer Rim colonies, the trade stations, even some core worlds." Elena's blood went cold. She activated the main display screen and watched as real-time battle reports flooded in from across known space. The hegemony fleet was massive beyond anything they had imagined. Hundreds of black ships moved like deadly shadows across the star maps. The first battle took place near Kepler Station, a major Etherian trade hub. Elena watched the feed from the station's defense platforms. The Etherian fleet moved forward in their traditional graceful formations. Their ships looked like works of art, with smooth curves and glowing energy fields. The hegemony ships were different. They were rough and angular, built for destruction rather than beauty. When they opened fire, the space between the fleets lit up with energy beams that cut through the darkness like swords of light. Admiral Silandra commanded the Etherian fleet from her flagship, the Starweaver. Elena had met her several times and respected her skill. The Etherian ships danced through space with impossible grace, their energy weapons painting bright lines against the black hulls of the enemy. For a few minutes, it looked like the Etherians might hold their own. Their ships were fast, and their weapons were precise. But then, the hegemony revealed their true power. The enemy shields began to change color as the Etherian weapons hit them. First blue, then green, then a deep purple that seemed to swallow light itself. The hegemony vessels adapted to each attack, learning and adjusting their defenses in real time. "Impossible," Elena whispered as she watched. "Their shields are rewriting themselves. Within an hour, the Etherian weapons became completely useless. Every energy blast was absorbed or redirected harmlessly away. The Starweaver tried ramming attacks, but the hegemony ships were too strong. When the enemy finally returned fire with full power, the elegant Etherian vessels cracked like eggs. Admiral Silandra's final message was calm and dignified even as her ship broke apart around her. Council Leader Viterith. The enemy technology exceeds all projections. Recommend immediate evacuation of all non-essential systems. Tell my family I did my duty. The Starweaver exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Elena felt tears in her eyes as she watched the pieces drift away into the dark. The Kithara fared no better. General Hixthak threw everything he had at the hegemony forces, attacking the mining world of Zerion. His swarm fighters moved like living clouds of metal insects, covering the sky in their numbers. The Kithara had always believed that quantity could overcome quality. Their philosophy was simple. Send enough small, fast ships, and some would get through any defense. Against most enemies, this worked. Against the hegemony, it was suicide. The enemy ships used weapons Elena had never seen before. They fired energy nets that spread out like spiderwebs, catching dozens of fighters at once. The trapped Kithara ships simply vanished as the energy tore them apart at the atomic level. General Hixthak himself led the final charge in his command vessel. Elena listened to his war cries over the communication channel as he and his remaining fighters dove straight at the largest hegemony ship. The enemy did not even slow down as they destroyed him and his entire force in less than 10 seconds. The Vorthak tried a different approach. Their crystal ships were the strongest in the galaxy, nearly indestructible under normal conditions. They formed a defensive line around the planet Sanctuary, where millions of refugees had gathered. Kryz's Tal commanded from the crystal dreadnought Eternal Light. Elena had always found the Vorthak hard to understand, but she respected their commitment to protecting others. They would not retreat as long as civilians needed defending. The hegemony tested the crystal ships with small attacks first. Energy beams bounced off harmlessly. Kinetic projectiles shattered against the diamond-hard hulls. For a brief moment, it seemed the Vorthak might actually stop the invasion. Then the hegemony used something new. Dark energy weapons that made space itself seem to crack and break. The crystal ships, so strong against normal attacks, began to develop hairline fractures where the dark energy touched them. Kryz Tal's final transmission was just 2 words in their ringing voice: protect others. The Eternal Light held its position even as cracks spread across its hull like ice breaking on a frozen lake. When it finally shattered, the pieces caught the light of the nearby star and threw rainbows across space one last time. Elena turned away from the displays. 3 of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had thrown their best ships and their finest commanders against the hegemony. All had failed completely. Admiral, Sarah said quietly, we're getting communications from the Council. They're requesting any assistance Earth can provide. Elena looked at the message display. It was from Ambassador Zeth Cora, transmitted from a fleeing refugee ship. Admiral Vasquez, we were wrong to dismiss your offer. The hegemony advances toward core worlds. Any help you can provide would be welcomed gratefully. Our apologies for past arrogance. Sarah read over her shoulder. What do we tell them? Tell them help is coming, Elena replied. But not the kind they expect. Elena's personal communicator buzzed. Fleet Admiral Chen's face appeared on the small screen. Behind her, Elena could see the massive shipyards of Earth's restoration facilities. Elena, we've been watching the battle reports. How long before they reach our space? Based on their speed, maybe 6 weeks. Are the ships ready? Chen smiled grimly. 63 vessels fully operational. The Missouri's main guns are loaded and ready. Victory's cannon crews have been drilling for weeks. Enterprise's flight deck is clear, and her birds are armed. What about the older ones? Those are the most interesting. The Viking longboats have been fitted with modern engines and magnetic grapples. The submarine crews are adapting torpedo tactics for space warfare. Even the ancient galleys have been modified for boarding actions. Elena felt something she had not felt since the council meeting. Hope. Chen, do you really think this will work? These ships are hundreds of years old. Some are thousands. Elena, I've been studying naval history my entire life. Every one of these vessels was built by people who faced impossible odds and found a way to win. The technology may be old, but the spirit that created them never dies. The galaxy thinks we're crazy. Maybe we are. But crazy has worked for humans before. Chen's image flickered as she turned to look at something off-screen. Elena, you should see this place. Engineers working around the clock, museum curators explaining historical weapon systems to modern tacticians, volunteers lining up to cruise ships their great-grandparents fought on. It's beautiful. Elena could hear the emotion in Chen's voice. The hegemony doesn't know what they're going to face, do they? No one does. That's our advantage. They've studied every modern fleet design, every current tactical doctrine. But no one has faced human naval warfare in its pure form for centuries. The communication ended, and Elena sat alone with her thoughts. Outside her window, she could see Earth's shipyards in the distance. Lights blazed as work continued day and night. Humanity was preparing for war, using weapons and tactics the rest of the galaxy had forgotten existed. She thought about Admiral Silandra's graceful death, General Hixthak's brave sacrifice, and Kryze Tal's final stand. They had fought with honor using the best their civilizations could offer. Now it was humanity's turn. But humans would fight differently. They would use every dirty trick, every desperate gambit, every insane idea that had ever worked in their violent history. The galaxy was about to remember why humans preserved their most dangerous memories in floating museums. The hegemony had defeated 3 advanced civilizations. Soon they would face something much more dangerous. A primitive species that refused to admit when they were beaten. Elena stood on the observation deck of Pearl Harbor Naval Museum, watching the impossible scene below. The USS Missouri, once a peaceful monument to human warfare, buzzed with activity as hundreds of workers crawled over her massive hull. Welding sparks flew like fireflies in the evening light. Dr. James Harrison, the museum's chief curator, stood beside her with tears in his eyes. Admiral, I've spent 40 years taking care of these ships. I never thought I'd see them come alive again. Tell me about her, Elena said, nodding toward the Missouri. She's a Iowa-class battleship. Launched in 1944 during World War II. Her main guns can fire shells weighing as much as a small car over 20 miles. She served in 3 wars and never lost a battle. Harrison paused, his voice filled with pride. The Japanese signed their surrender on her deck, ending the most terrible war in human history. Elena watched as a crane lifted a massive shell toward one of the ship's gun turrets. Will those guns work against the hegemony? With the modifications your engineers are making? Yes. Each shell now contains a fusion warhead and guidance systems. The barrels have been reinforced with modern materials. She'll hit harder than any weapon the galaxy has ever seen. A young technician ran up to them. Admiral, Fleet Admiral Chen, wants to see you in the main planning room. She says it's urgent. Elena followed the technician through corridors filled with bustling activity. Everywhere she looked, humans worked with desperate energy. Some were old museum volunteers who had spent decades caring for these ships. Others were young engineers fascinated by technology they had only read about. All of them shared the same fierce determination. The planning room had been set up in the old destroyer escort Cassin Young. Charts and displays covered every wall, showing the progress of restoration work across the planet. Chen stood in the center, directing traffic like a conductor leading an orchestra. Elena, look at this, Chen called out excitedly. She pointed to a holographic display showing HMS Victory, Nelson's flagship from the Battle of Trafalgar. The restoration team has fitted her with modern engines and shields, but kept all her original guns. Will cannons from 1805 really make a difference? Elena asked. An elderly woman in work clothes stepped forward. Admiral Vasquez, I'm Margaret Fletcher, head of the Royal Naval Museum. Those aren't just cannons. They're the guns that broke Napoleon's dreams of conquering Britain. Each one was cast by men who knew their survival depended on quality. Fletcher activated another display. We've loaded them with modern shells, but the barrels are original. The hegemony will face weapons designed by masters who understood that sometimes older is better. Elena moved to another display showing the aircraft carrier Enterprise. Workers were painting over rust spots while others loaded aircraft onto her flight deck. "Those planes look familiar," Elena observed. "F-14 Tomcats," replied Captain Rodriguez, the carrier's new commanding officer. "Retired from active service 50 years ago. But the museum kept them in perfect condition. We fitted them with modern engines and weapons, but kept the original design." "Why not use current fighters?" Rodriguez smiled. "Because current fighters are designed to fight current enemies. The hegemony has studied every modern spacecraft design, but nobody has seen a variable geometry fighter with a human pilot in decades. Sometimes surprise is worth more than technology." Elena walked through the room, examining displays from around the world. In Portsmouth, HMS Hood was being loaded with fusion torpedoes. In Norfolk, the submarine USS Nautilus was testing new stealth systems. In Yokosuka, museum staff worked on destroyers that had fought in the Pacific, but the most interesting projects were the oldest ones. "Show her the Viking boats," Chen said with a grin. Another display activated, showing a shipyard in Norway. Ancient longboats, their wooden hulls reinforced with modern materials, sat next to mechanical fusion engines. Men and women in work suits studied thousand-year-old designs while installing 25th-century technology. "The Vikings were raiders and explorers," explained Dr. Eric Lindquist via video link from Norway. "Their boats were built for speed, surprise, and getting close to the enemy. We've kept that philosophy, but added modern weapons." Elena watched as workers loaded the boats with magnetic grapples and personal weapons. "You're planning boarding actions?" "The hegemony fights at long range with energy weapons," Lindquist continued. "They've never faced close combat. Our ancestors knew that sometimes you have to get close to your enemy and settle things with hand weapons." The next display showed work in the Mediterranean. Ancient Roman galleys and Greek triremes were being fitted with rams made from ultra-hard materials. Elena shook her head in amazement. "Admiral," said Dr. Isabella Rossi from Rome, "these ships were built by people who understood one simple truth. Sometimes, the best way to sink an enemy ship is to punch a hole in it." Elena felt overwhelmed by the scope of the project. "How many ships total?" 63 vessels from across human history," Chen replied. "Everything from Bronze Age boats to World War II battleships. Each one represents a different approach to warfare, a different solution to the problem of defeating enemies who seem impossible to beat." A new voice interrupted from behind them. "And each one carries something else that modern ships have lost." Elena turned to see an old man in a naval uniform covered with ribbons. His weathered face showed decades of experience. "Admiral Zhang Wei, retired," he introduced himself. "I commanded modern ships for 30 years, before becoming a naval historian. I've studied every vessel in this project." "What do they carry that modern ships don't?" Elena asked. "History, memory, the accumulated wisdom of every sailor who ever served on them." Zhang Wei's voice carried deep conviction. "Modern ships are built by computers, designed for efficiency. These ships were built by humans who knew that efficiency doesn't win wars. Determination does." Elena looked around the room at all the displays. Ships from every era of human conflict were being prepared for one final battle. "You really think this will work, Admiral?" Zhang Wei replied. "Every one of these ships was built by people facing impossible odds. The Missouri fought the largest war in human history. Victory faced the greatest naval commander of her age. The Viking boats carried raiders across unknown oceans. They weren't just built to float. They were built to win." Chen activated a final display showing the overall battle plan. "The beauty of this fleet is that it makes no sense to anyone who hasn't studied human military history. The hegemony will scan our ships and see primitive weapons, obsolete designs, and ancient technology. They won't see the real danger." Elena realized. Exactly. They won't see crews trained on the hardest-won lessons in human warfare. They won't see weapons tested in humanity's bloodiest conflicts. Most importantly, they won't see the one thing that made these ships legendary, which is the willingness to do whatever it takes to win, no matter how crazy it seems. Elena spent the rest of the night touring the restoration sites. At each location, she met people who understood they were preparing for humanity's most important battle. Engineers who studied blueprints drawn by hands long dead. Historians who explained tactics used in wars that ended centuries ago. Workers who treated each restored gun and polished deck as a sacred duty. As dawn broke over Pearl Harbor, Elena stood again on the observation deck. The Missouri was almost ready. Her guns pointed toward the sky like fingers challenging the stars themselves. Around the harbor, smaller ships prepared for their own resurrection. Dr. Harrison joined her again, carrying a cup of coffee. "Admiral, there's something you should know about these ships." "What's that?" "They've never sailed together before. Different eras, different navies, different wars. But now they're going to fight as one fleet." Elena nodded thoughtfully. Humanity's entire naval heritage sailing into battle at the same time. "More than that," Harrison said. "Every one of these ships represents a time when humans faced an enemy that seemed impossible to defeat. And every one of them won." Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. In 6 weeks, the hegemony would reach Earth, expecting to find another easy victory. Instead, they would face something no enemy in galactic history had ever encountered. The collected memory of human warfare. Restored and ready for one last fight. The galaxy thought humans were primitive and peaceful. The museum ships would remind everyone what humans were truly capable of when their survival was at stake. Some lessons were too dangerous to forget completely. Some weapons were too valuable to retire forever. Elena smiled as she watched the Missouri's crew run through firing drills. The hegemony was about to learn that human museum pieces still had very sharp teeth. The hegemony fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system like a storm front of black metal and death. Overlord Xanthul stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion, watching his sensors identify the defending human fleet. What he saw made him laugh with cruel amusement. "Commander Veltar, what do our scanners show?" Xanthul asked his weapons officer. 63 human vessels approaching our position. Most appear to be ancient designs. Some readings suggest wooden construction with primitive metal reinforcement, chemical fuel systems, kinetic projectile weapons. Veltar paused, checking his readings twice. "Overlord, several ships appear to be powered by wind sails." Xanthul's laugh echoed through the bridge. "Wind sails? In space? These humans mock us with their floating museums." He activated the communication system. 10-5. Widmar Haas. 10-5. 10-5. 10-5. 10-5. 10-5. 10-5. 10. Human fleet, this is Overlord Xanthul of the Hegemony. Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Admiral Elena Vasquez responded from the bridge of the USS Yorktown, the restored aircraft carrier serving as her flagship. "Overlord Xanthul, this is Admiral Vasquez of Earth Defense Command. Your request is denied. Turn back now, or face the consequences." "Consequences?" Xanthul could barely control his laughter. "From museum pieces and antiques? Human, your species amuses me. I will enjoy breaking your primitive toys." Elena cut the communication and turned to her fleet. 63 ships from across human history spread out in formations that would have confused any galactic military analyst. Ancient sailing ships mixed with ironclad warships. World War battleships sailed alongside Viking longboats. It looked like chaos, but Elena knew better. "All ships, this is Yorktown Actual. Execute Operation Forlorn Hope. Show them what human history looks like when it fights back." The battle began with the hegemony's standard long-range energy bombardment. Crimson beams lanced across space toward the human fleet. Most alien enemies would have been destroyed in the first few seconds, but humans had learned different lessons in their wars. The USS Missouri opened fire first. Her massive 16-inch guns, upgraded with fusion shells and modern targeting, sent projectiles screaming toward the enemy at incredible speeds. The hegemony ship's adaptive shields, designed to handle energy weapons, flickered uncertainly as solid matter traveling at relativistic velocities smashed into them. "Impossible!" Commander Veltar shouted as alarms blared across the Dominion. "Their projectiles are penetrating our defensive fields!" The first hegemony destroyer exploded as a Missouri shell punched straight through its hull and detonated inside. The enemy shields, so effective against energy weapons, provided no defense against old-fashioned kinetic bombardment delivered with modern precision. HMS Victory followed up with her broadside. Cannonballs loaded with antimatter cores fired from guns cast in 1765 struck a hegemony cruiser. The ancient weapons, dismissed as primitive, tore through advanced armor like it was paper. "What are those weapons made of?" Xanthul demanded. "Overlord, they appear to be iron cannon firing solid projectiles. Our systems cannot explain how such primitive weapons are penetrating our defenses." Xanthul watched in growing alarm as more of his ships took damage from weapons that should not have been able to harm them. But worse was coming. The USS Enterprise launched her fighters. F-14 Tomcats. Aircraft designed decades before humanity reached space, screamed toward the hegemony fleet. The alien point defense systems, calibrated for modern spacecraft, could not track the variable geometry fighters as they shifted shape during combat maneuvers. Commander Lisa Park led the fighter squadron in her restored Tomcat. She had trained on modern fighters, but something about the old plane felt right in her hands. It responded like a living thing. Every control, crafted by engineers who understood that pilots needed machines they could trust with their lives. "This is Maverick Lead," she called over the radio, using the ancient call sign with pride. "Beginning attack, run on the big ugly one." Her fighters dove toward the hegemony flagship, firing missiles that contained technology the aliens had never seen. The missiles used human naval tactics adapted for space, approaching in unpredictable patterns that confused the enemy targeting systems. But the real shock came when the older ships engaged. 3 Viking longboats, their crews wearing modern armor over ancient leather, fired magnetic grapples at a hegemony destroyer. The aliens watched in disbelief as the wooden boats, impossibly fast with their fusion engines, latched onto their hull. "They're attempting to board us," the destroyer captain reported in panic. "Hundreds of humans with primitive weapons are cutting through our airlocks." The Viking crews poured into the hegemony ship carrying weapons their ancestors would have recognized. Axes and swords, upgraded with molecular edges and energy fields, cut through alien soldiers who had no experience with close combat. The hegemony had fought wars across the galaxy, but always at long range, with energy weapons. They had no idea how to fight humans who wanted to look their enemies in the eyes. Eric Bloodaxe, a descendant of ancient raiders who had taken his ancestors' name with pride, led his crew through the ship's corridors. His magnetic axe cleaved through alien armor, while his men fought with the fury of berserkers backed by fusion power. "For Valhalla and Earth," he roared as his warriors overwhelmed the ship's bridge. Similar scenes played out across the battlefield as other ancient vessels used tactics no galactic power had seen in centuries. Roman triremes, their bronze rams reinforced with ultra-hard alloys, punched holes in hegemony hulls. Greek fire, updated with plasma technology, burned through enemy ships that had never faced incendiary weapons. The CSS Hunley, humanity's first successful submarine, approached underwater through the void of space, using stealth technology adapted from her original design. Captain Maria Santos had studied the Hunley's history and knew her mission. The little submarine was designed for one purpose: to sink a bigger ship no matter the cost. "All hands, this is the captain," she announced to her tiny crew. "We're going to ram their reactor core just like our ancestors did in Charleston Harbor. It's been an honor sailing with you." The Hunley struck the hegemony command cruiser at full speed, her reinforced prow punching deep into the alien vessel's engine room. The submarine's fusion reactor detonated, taking the enemy ship with her, in a blast that lit up half the battlefield. Overlord Xanthul watched his fleet being torn apart by weapons and tactics that made no sense. His advanced ships, designed to fight other advanced civilizations, had no defense against humanity's historical warfare made manifest. "How are they doing this?" he demanded. "Our shields adapt to their weapons, but their weapons keep changing." "Overlord, each human ship uses completely different technology. Some fire solid metal, others use energy weapons we've never encountered. Some ram us directly, while others release small craft that board our vessels. Our adaptive systems cannot keep up with such diversity. Xanthul realized the horrible truth. The hegemony had studied every modern military doctrine, every current weapon system, every contemporary tactic used by galactic civilizations, but no one had prepared them to fight against the entire history of human warfare applied simultaneously. The USS Missouri fired another salvo, her shells guided by targeting computers but driven by the same principles that had won battles in Earth's bloodiest conflicts. HMS Hood's torpedoes, carrying warheads designed with lessons learned at Jutland and the Denmark Strait, found their targets with deadly precision. Ancient galleys rammed modern cruisers. Medieval sailing ships poured cannon fire into advanced destroyers. Ironclad monitors traded shots with vessels armed with plasma cannons. Every era of human naval warfare was represented, and each brought its own hard-won lessons to bear against an enemy that had never faced such desperate, creative violence. "Overlord!" Commander Veltar shouted over the chaos. "We're losing ships faster than we can count them. These humans fight like madmen." Xanthul watched his tactical displays dissolve into confusion as his fleet struggled against an enemy that seemed to break every rule of modern warfare. The humans used no standard formations, followed no recognized doctrine, and employed weapons that should not have existed. But they were winning. Elena Vasquez stood on the Yorktown's bridge, watching her impossible fleet tear through the most advanced military force in the galaxy. Around her, museum curators served as tactical advisors, while historians explained weapon capabilities to modern crews. "Admiral," reported Captain Rodriguez, "we've destroyed 40% of their fleet. The rest are breaking formation." Elena nodded grimly. "Signal all ships. Press the attack. Show them what happens when you threaten Earth." The human fleet surged forward like a tide of controlled chaos. Ancient weapons and modern technology, primitive tactics, and advanced engineering, all united in service of the most dangerous idea in human culture: that any enemy could be defeated if you were willing to pay the price and fight hard enough. The galaxy was about to remember why humans preserved their most violent memories in floating museums. Some lessons were too important to forget, and some weapons were too effective to retire permanently. Overlord Xanthul stared at his tactical display in growing horror. Half his fleet was gone, destroyed by weapons that should not have been able to harm his ships. The other half was scattered and confused, trying to fight an enemy that made no tactical sense. The humans pressed their attack with terrifying determination. Ancient warships moved between his formations like sharks, sensing blood in the water. Every few minutes, another hegemony vessel disappeared in fire and debris. "Overlord," his communications officer called out. "The destroyer Vengeance is requesting immediate assistance. They report being boarded by humans carrying swords?" Swords? Xanthul could not believe what he was hearing. In a space battle? "Yes, Overlord. The humans cut through our airlocks and are fighting crew to crew in the corridors. Our soldiers don't know how to respond to close combat." 34. On his display, Xanthul watched the Vengeance's signal go dark. Another ship lost to tactics that belonged in ancient history, not modern warfare. His advanced AI systems kept trying to analyze the human fleet and failing. How do you plan against an enemy using weapons from 50 different time periods? The USS Missouri fired another salvo at the Dominion itself. Massive shells, each one carrying the destructive power of a small nuclear weapon, slammed into his flagship's shields. The adaptive defenses flickered and strained under the kinetic bombardment. "Shields down to 60%, his engineer reported. "Overlord, their projectile weapons are overloading our defensive grid. We were never designed to handle this type of sustained kinetic assault." HMS Victory added her firepower to the attack. Cannon fire that would have looked familiar to sailors from Napoleon's era struck the Dominion's hull with antimatter fury. Each hit reminded Xanthul that he was fighting ghosts made real, weapons wielded by the inheritors of Earth's bloodiest lessons. But the decisive moment came when the aircraft carrier Enterprise launched her final squadron. Captain Rodriguez had been saving his best pilots for the last attack. These were the fighters carrying the heaviest weapons, flown by pilots who had trained on museum aircraft since childhood. Elena watched from the Yorktown as the ancient fighters dove toward the hegemony flagship like eagles attacking their prey. Each Tomcat carried missiles loaded with technology the aliens had never encountered, guided by tactics developed in Earth's forgotten wars. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the hegemony flagship." Elena nodded. "Put it through." Xanthul's image appeared on her screen. The alien commander looked shaken, his confidence replaced by something Elena had never seen from the hegemony before. Fear. "Human Admiral, I request terms for surrender," Xanthul said, his voice carefully controlled. Elena felt a moment of satisfaction, but also sadness. Too many ships had been lost on both sides. The victory was necessary, but not something to celebrate. "Overlord Xanthul, you will order all remaining hegemony forces to retreat from this galaxy immediately. You will not return. Any attempt to attack human or allied worlds will result in the full response of Earth's defense forces." Xanthul looked around his damaged bridge. Warning lights flashed red as his ship continued to take damage from the impossible human fleet. "Your terms are accepted, but I must ask, how? Our technology is superior to yours in every measurable way." Elena smiled grimly. "You studied our modern weapons and found them wanting. But you never studied our history. Every ship in this fleet carries the memory of humans who faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. Technology changes, but human determination is eternal. We underestimated your species greatly." "Yes, you did. Remember that when you tell others about this battle. Earth protects its own. And we have very long memories." The communication ended. Elena watched as the surviving hegemony ships gathered around their flagship and began their retreat. 23 vessels out of an original fleet of over 200, the remainder drifted as wreckage, destroyed by museum pieces and antiques. But the victory had come at a cost. Elena looked at her casualty reports with heavy heart. The CSS Hunley was gone, sacrificed in her ramming attack. HMS Hood had been destroyed when her magazine exploded during a torpedo run. 3 Viking longboats had been lost during their boarding actions. Captain Maria Santos, Eric Bloodaxe, and hundreds of other brave souls had given their lives to save not just Earth, but the entire galaxy. They had crewed ships their ancestors would have recognized, fighting with weapons that bridged centuries of human warfare. Elena activated the fleet communication system. "All ships. This is Admiral Vasquez. The enemy is retreating. We have achieved victory." Cheers echoed across the communication channels as crews celebrated their impossible success. But Elena's next words brought soberness to the moment. "We will honor our fallen. They died as their ancestors did, protecting others from those who would destroy freedom. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten." The trip home took 3 days. During the journey, Elena received messages from across the galaxy. The Galactic Council, now operating from refugee ships, sent formal thanks and apologies. Ambassador Zeth Kora's message was particularly humble. "Admiral Vasquez, the Etherian people owe you a debt that can never be repaid. We mocked your ships and dismissed your offer of help. We will spend generations trying to understand how we were so wrong about human capabilities." Similar messages came from the surviving Kithra and Vorthak representatives. The galaxy had learned a hard lesson about underestimating humans, and they would not forget it soon. Elena spent most of the journey walking through the museum ships, talking to their crews. On the USS Missouri, she met Gunner's mate Thompson, whose great-grandfather had served on the original ship during World War II. "Admiral, it felt like his ghost was guiding my hands during the battle," Thompson said, patting the massive barrel of the main gun. "These old ships still know how to fight." On HMS Victory, she found the crew painting the names of their fallen comrades on a plaque near Nelson's former cabin. The old sailing ship had taken damage during the battle, but her crew had kept her fighting until the end. Elena's final stop was the Enterprise. Captain Rodriguez stood on the flight deck, watching his maintenance crews service the antique fighters that had helped win the battle. "Admiral, I've been thinking about what happened out there," Rodriguez said. "Those hegemony ships were designed by computers, built for efficiency, crewed by soldiers who fought the same way their manuals told them to. And our ships? Our ships were built by people who knew they might have to die in them. Every rivet, every gun placement, every design choice was made by humans who understood that sometimes you have to fight even when you can't win." Elena nodded. "That's the difference between a warship and a war machine." 3 weeks later, Elena stood once again in the chamber of the Galactic Council. But this time, the setting was different. The Council had relocated to Earth's orbital station, while their home worlds were rebuilt. The human delegation no longer sat alone. Representatives from dozens of species occupied chairs around them, all eager to learn from humanity's example. Council leader Via Tereth, looking older but wiser than before, addressed the assembly. "Admiral Vasquez, the Council formally recognizes Earth as a founding member of the Galactic Defense Alliance. Your species has proven that courage and determination can overcome any technological advantage." Elena accepted the recognition with dignity, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Below them, Earth's shipyards were busy once again. The surviving museum ships were being restored to their places of honor, their service complete. New vessels were being built using lessons learned from both ancient and modern warfare. The Missouri had returned to Pearl Harbor, her guns silent but ready. HMS Victory had sailed back to Portsmouth, her crew dismissed with honors. The Enterprise had landed for the last time, her pilots proud of their heritage. But most importantly, humanity had earned something more valuable than recognition or alliance membership. They had earned respect. Ambassador Zethkora approached Elena after the ceremony. "Admiral, I have a question that has troubled me since the battle." "What is it?" "Ambassador? Those ships of yours. They were already old when our civilizations first achieved spaceflight. How did you know they would still be effective in combat?" Elena smiled, thinking of all the historians, curators, and engineers who had made the victory possible. "Ambassador, we never stopped studying why those ships worked. We preserved them not just as monuments to the past, but as schools for the future. Every human child learns about the Missouri's guns, Victory's cannons, and Enterprise's fighters. But they were museum pieces." "No," Elena corrected gently. "They were sleeping warriors, and when the galaxy needed them most, they woke up." The ceremony concluded, and Elena prepared to return to Earth. As her shuttle descended toward the blue planet below, she could see the lights of the shipyards where humanity continued to build and learn. The galaxy had learned not to underestimate human determination. More importantly, humanity had learned that their history was not just something to remember. It was something to build upon. In museums around Earth, new plaques were being installed next to the restored warships. They told the story of the Battle of Sol, where ancient weapons and modern courage had saved the galaxy from conquest. But Elena knew the real lesson was simpler. Some things are too important to forget, and some weapons are too effective to retire permanently. When you preserve your history, you preserve your strength. The museum ships had completed their final mission. They had reminded the galaxy why humans kept their most dangerous memories alive.